If the compounding pharmacies and these online subscription companies are trying to say, we're doing this for the good of the people, we're trying to help people with this alternative, well, you don't see them rushing to make expensive chemotherapy drugs and sell those to people to save them money. No, you see them taking advantage of a group that's been taken advantage of for decades through the diet industry, and they basically have just kind of transformed the diet industry into this subscription medicine industry, and the focus is still the same. It's just like the diet industry. It's like, let's take advantage of this vulnerable group and let's make as much money as we can off of them.
This is Fat Science, a podcast dedicated to the science of why we get fat. No diets, no agendas, just science that makes you feel better. This podcast is for informational purposes only and is not intended to replace professional medical advice.
I'm Dr. Emily Cooper. I've been treating patients with metabolic issues for over 25 years. I'm on a mission to raise awareness about metabolic dysfunction and why diets don't work.
Hi, I'm Andrea Taylor. I've been fat, very fat, chubby, morbidly obese, and done almost every diet ever invented. They all worked until they didn't. I've known Dr. Cooper forever, but when I became her patient and we learned metabolism was the real problem, wow, everything changed, and I've never been healthier.
And I'm Mark Wright. It's time for Fat Science.
Wait, does this podcast make me look fat?
Welcome to Fat Science. I'm Mark Wright, along with Andrea Taylor and Dr. Emily Cooper. Great to see you two.
Hello.
All right, this is Compounded Drugs Part 2, and we've decided to do another edition of Fat Science dedicated to compounded metabolic drugs because there was a huge response from those of you listening. Some of it really good, some of it kind of critical. We're going to go through all of that because we really feel like this deserves a further discussion. So, Dr. Cooper, you got some emails kind of pushing back on this. What was your general reaction when you first got some of those emails of people criticizing what we talked about?
Well, I think I totally understand, because I think the emails that we got, a lot of them were pointing out that we didn't spend enough time or address enough the reason that people are really turning to the compounded drugs, which is the cost, basically. And that I think that the tone of some of the emails, they were very kind and everything, but it was just pointing out that piece of criticizing the way that we presented it and left out the part, or at least didn't emphasize it enough, of the reason behind why people turn to that. I wanted to say that I get that. I do understand that reason.
And that's economics, right?
The economics, yes, the economics of it. But I think what we were trying to get across was just about the compounded and, you know, the problem that that's setting up. But that's why we needed this part 2, so we could talk about more the economics of it and the reasons behind why we may be in this situation right now.
So let's start out with this email from Crystal. I think it really does a good job of explaining where a lot of people are coming from, Dr. Cooper. Crystal says, "Hi there, I'm listening to the episode on compound GLP-1s. Your information on the dangers and complications are understood and appreciated. The discussion points about not understanding why people are going through the compound route felt naive, disingenuous. There are many of us whose insurance will not cover any weight loss prescriptions at all. I agree that compounding makes me nervous, and I'm not going that route. But this leaves me paying out of pocket. Even with the Eli Lilly savings card, it's still a chunk of my mortgage payment every month, and I have a good paying job. In our current economy, these drugs end up being available only for the wealthy or the lucky few who can find coverage. I wish this fact had been addressed in the episode. Thank you for your time." And Crystal, thanks for the email. So what's your response, Dr. Cooper, to Crystal?
Gosh, I could not have said it better. It's so well stated, and it really is the sentiment that's shared by a lot of our patients too, and I've heard this again and again. And what's really interesting is that the weight-related treatment coverage, which I don't really get why this is the case, but it's employer determined. So your employer, and I thought it was just specific to Washington State, but I did a little research and it sounds like it's across the country this is the case. There may be some states that are different, so let me know if you're in a state where it's different. And of course, some of our listeners are around the world, so there'll be differences in other countries. But in the US, to have weight-related treatment coverage, that's what it's kind of referred to as, which would include the medications, you have to have your employer sign on for that type of coverage for the employee-based insurance. And so going to the insurance company and complaining does no good because these meds would be excluded if your employer has not opted in for that coverage. But what we find is that a lot of employers are not aware because it's not that you have to opt out, you have to opt in. And so a lot of employers, when they set up their coverage plans, they may not realize that they can opt in for that type of coverage. And from what I've heard, it's not that much more expensive. I mean, I get it that if you have a business, you do have to pay more per premium if you do opt in. But one thing that I think we have our patients do is go straight to their HR benefits manager at the companies and ask them about this because they can opt in for a single employee or the entire employee pool. And so we have had sometimes some luck with that. It takes more work, but you can potentially make a change that way. And so I'm just throwing that out there because I don't think people understand that it's like the insurance coverage is not really where the levers are pulled when it comes to anti-obesity medication, the way it's termed, AOM. We like to call it metabolic treatment, metabolic strengthening medication. But so just to get the story straight, it's really that the employer determines a lot of that coverage.
But to the point that everyone is going through compounding pharmacies because they can't get coverage, number one, through insurance, or it's just too expensive. What's your response to that allegation?
Yeah, thank you. Well, yes, I totally understand that. And I think that we go through a lot of hoops with our patients. I'm not saying that other providers don't, but it does create like an enormous strain on any practice to try to secure their patients with brand-only medication in spite of these barriers. And it sounds like this letter mentioned using the Lilly coupon, and Lilly has some other savings for their lower dose options. That is one way, and that's been one step by pharma to try to help, but it's not enough. It's definitely not enough. I mean, it's the right direction for what they're doing with adding these coupons, adding these lower cost options with vials rather than pens to save costs on the manufacturing. But they need to go much further, and all the companies need to. Novo Nordisk needs to really step up, and they have to step up and provide a reasonable solution while we're trying to work on getting the employers to get on board with the coverage. And I get why people turn to the compounding. I mean, we in our clinic, and I'm not telling you should do this, but you could talk to your provider about it. There are reputable pharmacies in Canada that do sell these medications at a fraction of the cost. And so a lot of our patients are supplementing with the Canadian pharmacy options or using Canadian pharmacies combined with samples that we can provide based on what the pharma companies will allot to us. And those are samples that are just free samples, and we're allowed to pass them on to patients. And we don't make any money off of those. Of course, those are just handed out to people who can't afford other ways of getting the medication. At least that way it reduces their overall costs. And so we're always looking at what's the most cost-effective way to get at this. And with our patients, we do spend more and more time on trying to problem solve in that area to avoid having to go the compounded route. And I do understand that sometimes it's still expensive. Most of our patients, most of our patients are in the education field. They're educators, they're teachers or principals, or mostly in public school. So it's really difficult because in our state, they are state employees, and our state employees don't have coverage, which is really awful.
For straight obesity?
For this type of, for those, quote, obesity medications, They don't have coverage. But we're also lucky in our state that certain companies do provide coverage, certain big companies in Washington State, Seattle area do provide coverage. But again, so if you have to turn to something less expensive, I would first find out all the options, because is it really less expensive to do the compounded overall? Because if there's no guarantee it's going to be as effective, and you don't really know, you're taking a risk, is it better to spend, maybe you're only going to be spending $50 more. I know that's a lot of money. I don't mean to sound insensitive, but overall, your health is worth it if there is any way that you can make it work to do the brand name. If you can't, and you make that decision with your healthcare provider who's following you in a comprehensive plan, who understands your overall health, who is recommending this, I'm not trying to speak out against that. I understand that that may end up being necessary for some people. I do. I just wish it wasn't the case. I wish that there was a way that we could shift our thinking entirely on this whole situation and stop the trends that are happening before it becomes a serious problem population-wide.
I would say, for me, when I first started on all these drugs, which granted was a very long time ago, it wasn't covered under my insurance because I didn't work for a big company. I was on my own, and it wasn't covered. And it was a huge amount of money. And I chose my health over many other things in my life. I did go to have the prescription fulfilled in Canada, and it was a huge expense for me. I didn't make a lot of money, and it impacted my life incredibly, but I was choosing my health over lots of other things. And I would not have gone to a compounded drug, and I don't think it's just because Dr. Cooper was my doctor, but it probably was, because I think the idea of a compounded drug kind of would freak me out because I don't know what's in it. And when it comes to drugs, I'm like, oh, what is that? What's going on in there? I'm one of those people who looks up the drugs and sees what's interacting, what's going on. And also, I want to know, like, what's happening inside my body. We take these drugs, Mark and I, and we get tested every 3 to 4 months, and we know what's happening, what's interacting, what's going on with everything that's happening inside our body, how are the drugs reacting, what's happening to every single organ, every single thing inside of our body, how, like, should we be on a higher dose, a lower dose, what's happening to our liver, what's happening to our heart, what's happening to our guts. If you're going to some internet somebody who you may not even see their face, they may just be some kind of robot, like, you don't know what's going on with your lungs, you don't know what's going on with your fatty liver, you don't know what's going on with anything else inside your body. They are only there for one thing only, to lower your weight and to sell you more whatever it is they're selling you. I mean, it's a financial transaction. And to me, that's not what medicine is about.
Yeah, and I think what you touched on, Andrea, I'd love to get Dr. Cooper's reaction to this, and that is that what people aren't talking about in this discussion of compounded drugs is that these medical providers prescribing compounded drugs are making money.
It's big deal money, too. This is big deal money. These people have hundreds of thousands of, they're calling them patients. I would call them customers.
Yeah. So, Dr. Cooper, your reaction to that, there's not a single treatment that you prescribe in your practice or any reputable doctor would prescribe in a practice where they financially benefit from that prescription, right?
Well, one thing to get straight is it's not the doctors that work in those places. We're talking about the online subscription model, prescription and pen or vial that you get through a compounded pharmacy for a subscription monthly fee. That includes your consult with this online provider and includes the compounded drug. Those companies, the doctor or the nurse practitioner or the physician assistant who's authorizing that prescription is an employee of that company. They're not an owner of the company. So now why they chose to work there, I don't know.
But still, they're making money based on prescribing a compounded drug. I mean, that's the whole business model.
Not really.
It's not that they're medical providers treating metabolic syndrome.
Well, when
Their
we're
whole
saying
purpose, though, is to just write prescriptions for compounded drugs.
right.
And
But
send them off.
Yes, they're earning their living that way, but they're not making much money, honestly. Who's making all the money are the investors, the owners of those companies that are not doctors. They may be medical people that are investing into it, but it's big money. It's not what doctors are paid or nurse practitioners or physician assistants. They're just paid a standard salary that's typical for their profession. So they're not maybe cognizant of the fact that they are recommending a product that this company is profiting off of, and that company would be out of business if they didn't do that. Like, they need the product to exist. They need the doctor as a tool, because according to the FDA, you cannot just give a person sell a person that product without a medical professional signing off on it. So
To me, it's a co-conspirator.
well, it is. No, I'm not defending those doctors, but I'm trying to put this in perspective of the
Right.
kind of money
About
we're
where the
talking
money
about.
really goes.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, and the
They're
kind
not the
of
big
money.
profiteers, but
No.
yeah.
No, but they wouldn't have a job if they started to say, I'm not going to prescribe that for this patient because I don't think this is an appropriate patient, or I don't think, they're out. They just get someone who's a yes person and just does this. So I'm not saying they're not, like, quote, guilty or whatever, or they don't share the responsibility. They do, but I feel like the real power in this is the money, the investment money that people have put in. And one of my deep concerns is that these compounded drugs, as Andrea mentioned, are not FDA tested, right? They're not FDA tested, and so we don't have any control over them. They're going through a loophole because of the shortages that occurred before. And now that the shortages are over, are they going to stop? Or is the money too big for the investors to let go of it? Because if it stops being permitted by the FDA, you would see all of their stocks drop. You would see them lose so much money because they wouldn't be able to stay afloat. And they wouldn't make the kind of money they're making now on skincare or hair loss or erectile dysfunction if they had to let go of that. So what concerns me is what Mark was saying. You have medical professionals, like a company that holds themselves out as a medical organization, selling and profiting off of a product that they are prescribing. That ethically isn't good. And then on top of it, we have to look to our FDA and the future of our FDA. Where is our FDA going? Because I know that one of the nominees for the FDA chief has significant involvement in one of these telehealth companies that does do the GLP-1 compoundeds. So if this person becomes in charge of the FDA that has to regulate the compounded GLPs,
It's not going to go anywhere good.
where will
for
we
what
go?
we're talking about.
Right. And so why we're talking about all this, I know again, we can get off in the weeds and go on and on about this, of why it seems not right, But what Andrea was talking about is that this is treating a patient as a customer. It's treating a serious medication as a commodity, as a purse, a knockoff purse.
Yeah.
And so I just look at my normal day in the life. Our patients, first of all, metabolic dysfunction is complex, and it's an exciting science. It's wonderful science. It's really looking at the neuroendocrine system and how it affects our metabolism. And high body weight is just merely a symptom of metabolic issues that may be occurring, metabolic dysfunction. And we know that people with high body weight can be completely healthy, but conditions such as metabolic syndrome do occur more often in people with high body weight. Metabolic syndrome carries a very high risk for diabetes, heart attacks, strokes, There are other things that metabolic dysfunction causes: infertility, testosterone problems, fatigue, kidney disease. There's so many things. And so once you remove a person from a true medical setting and put them in a quasi pseudo medical online simple treatment for a number on a scale, you end up potentially harming that patient in so many ways, because they have a false sense that, oh, because my weight's going down, I'm getting healthier and I'm taking this shot or I'm taking whatever. And then they start to wonder, well, I wonder why I don't feel better, or I wonder why my doctor noticed that my numbers don't look better, or now I have fatty liver and I didn't even know I had fatty liver. If they're lucky, they're going to get diagnosed with some of these other things that really require monitoring. And so this is why treating this metabolic condition that causes the high weight is done normally in a comprehensive setting where we're looking at the entire picture. There are people board certified in this area of medicine that have studied for a long time. And there are most of the authoritative groups, such as the Obesity Action Coalition, have come out and are very much against this movement and are trying to remind people that this is actually fueling weight stigma, to treat this serious medical condition as something that is just sort of like a add-on. And as I kind of was telling Andrea and Mark before, you don't see, if the compounding pharmacies and these online subscription companies are trying to say, we're doing this for the good of the people, we're trying to help people with this alternative, well, you don't see them rushing to make expensive chemotherapy drugs and sell those to people to save them money. No, you see them taking advantage of a group that's been taken advantage of for decades through the diet industry. And they basically have just kind of transformed the diet industry into this subscription medicine industry, and the focus is still the same. It's just like the diet industry. It's like, let's take advantage of this vulnerable group and let's make as much money as we can off of them.
It's definitely that. And look, it's coming from somebody who spent most of their career in a marketing situation. So, and I do applaud the, ramping up the evil ways that they've done it, because they've done a really good job. Like those him, hers commercials that were on the Super Bowl, making everyone feel really like, oh, it's the evil insurance industry. Oh, we should hate them. And now we should go to the compounded drugs. Yes, yes, yes. I mean, they did a really good job in terms of advertising. As somebody who's a former commercial maker, those were really good commercials. I hated them. Because as somebody who would be the potential client, they did a very good job. But I know on the other side, that's not what you want. It's sort of like they're selling just, if you need a whole box of crayons, they're only selling you the blue one. Like, that's not what you need. You need somebody who does the whole picture. You need somebody who looks at your whole metabolism, not just weight. That's why I always say, these are not weight loss drugs. These are metabolism drugs. Like, you need something that's more. And it just bothers me so much. It's like, it's what you said. You're not seeing like a whole industry pop up with, hey, here's some cheapo chemotherapy medicine. Come on down.
Or arthritis, some of the arthritis
Come
medicines
on down. Come on down.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that doesn't happen. And I think that it's a really good analogy to tell people.
I was surprised, Dr. Cooper, when I saw that Hims Hers ad during the Super Bowl, because that was the biggest stage in the world when it comes to advertising. And the fact that compounding companies have been sued, I mean, actively sued by Big Pharma because of patent infringement. And we're not really in that shortage era like we were. What was your reaction to that commercial?
I was shocked. I was shocked it even was allowed to be aired, because it, first of all, it was so offensive I could hardly even watch it in the beginning because it showed like candy, I think, and a tape measure and a big belly and all of the things that fuel weight stigma as images that are pretty traumatic, actually. And it just one after another, as Andrea said, probably to make you feel like awful and
Crappy.
scared.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then all of a sudden it was a bright day, and it was like the evil insurance, evil pharma companies, and almost like it was driving a wedge between patients and their health care, their existing health care, which we need patients to be linked into their health care and not, we don't need someone coming and saying they're evil. It's called splitting, like where you go and you try to undermine something in order to like siphon off somebody to your side. But so it was very manipulative. And then it was like this bright sunshine with these people that all looked like sane.
Oh, yeah.
That, are promoting these syringes and there's pills. Well, first of all, also, they're selling medicine in forms that it's not even like approved in, even by the FDA. So, but in any case, it just kept going. And I was just thinking, whoa, this is really weird. This is so weird because pharma companies, when you see a drug ad, and that's basically what it was, they're promoting their service, but their service can't exist without them being able to market this compounded drug. So they're really a drug company that's added on this tiny fraction of a service and charging people. But yet the ad didn't follow any of the normal guidelines for advertising for medications.
Yeah, you listen to those ads and you can tell the lawyers have written, 60% of them because they talk about all the side effects, all the possible problems. But that ad had none of that, which was shocking.
And they showed the needle, which was like incredible.
Yeah, it was so strange. And I know that like with Big Pharma, they have to have every word reviewed by the FDA. It has to be reviewed before they're allowed to air anything. And it has to meet certain very rigid, strict criteria. And they have to have black box warnings on their medication that's given to the patient saying that what could happen, in rare instances. But when you're going through this other avenue, how did they fall through that? I mean, how did this happen? How was this even permitted? And I do know that there are some state senators that have filed complaints with the FDA about it. And I think that you can file some complaints or contact your senator to file complaints if you were equally offended as we were. But that is the big issue right now. Where's this going? Look into the future. The money's big. It's going to gain momentum because of just the sheer profits. And it's just like the diet industry. The diet industry didn't stop, even though everyone knows diets don't work. It went on for decades, and it's still going.
Still going
By
on.
the way, is a multi-billion-dollar industry.
Right.
I mean,
and now
crazy.
the diet industry has married with this subscription compounded GLP-1 industry. And it's continuing to use the same playbook as the diet industry. So it's going to be, it's your fault if it's not working. Well, maybe you're doing something wrong. Well, you're eating this and you should be eating that. Or maybe you didn't inject the medicine right. Or maybe you didn't do something. It'll be your fault when things are not working for you. And then they'll hook you onto the next thing that has its own set of problems. And in the meantime, you're not having a relationship with a provider who specializes in this area, who can look into what's best for you individually. Everyone in this field knows there's not a one-shot solution to this.
Literally.
This is
Literally
a joke.
a one-shot. Literally.
I mean, I don't mean to laugh and sound crass, but
But that's why I think that's why it really upset you,
Yeah,
and the people's responses to our compounding discussion, that we weren't being elitist and we weren't being like sort of cavalier about the like anti-compounding discussion. Like you really, really think about it, and you really, really care about people's ongoing relationships with their doctor, and it's not just because you're a doctor. I think that it's because you care about people having a relationship with a doctor and caring about what goes on in their metabolism, as opposed to just losing weight.
Yes.
I think that that's the difference.
I wanted to just read final email, just very briefly, from Tipora. She's a fan of the show. She felt like we missed the mark because she feels like the insurance industry disconnect from these drugs is really a big part of the problem. She has been on compounded tirzepatide, and it's changed her life. It's had profound impacts, good impacts on her health. She can't afford to take Zepbound because her insurance company won't cover it. Dr. Cooper, I'd love just a final thought from you about this disconnect. In my case, I couldn't get a certain drug that Dr. Cooper thought was the best because I didn't have type 2 diabetes. And so, there is still this disconnect with the insurance industry. And what is it going to take to solve that, Dr. Cooper?
Well, we need a lot to solve it. I don't know if it'll ever happen. But ideally, instead of looking at things as diabetes and obesity, there is a term diabesity, which is a broader concept that kind of outlines that both diabetes type 2 and, quote, obesity share some common underlying pathophysiology, meaning that their root causes share some commonalities. And so if that's the case, why do we not have the ability to use these medications a little bit more flexibly? So I think ultimately that would help. And I think some of the drug companies are trying to get these other FDA indications, such as sleep apnea or cardiovascular risk reduction, to help strengthen the provider's arguments with the insurance of why the patient should receive it. But we have to always think, why is our healthcare system set so that employers determine this? Because I don't know of any other condition where an employer can decide whether a whole entire class of medication would be available to their employees or not. So that would be something, if there are any people in our listening group that have any experience working with understanding how that's happening and how do we get past that, I think that would make a big difference, because then it really would be the insurers that are just determining this. And a lot of them follow suit of Medicare. And I have to say, I've been very impressed with Medicare lately. I am very impressed with Medicare. So Medicare has stepped up a movement started about 6 months ago to press Medicare to cover more, quote, obesity medication. And I have seen some patients on Medicare get covered for it.
That's me.
You too? Mm-hmm.
Yep, I'm covered.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think this is probably not going to be the last time that we talk about this, because where there's money, this industry is going to continue operating.
Follow the money.
Follow the money. So, but I think this has been a really good discussion, and I really appreciate the emails and the comments from those of you listening, and feel free. info@diabesityinstitute.org is how you can get a hold of us if you have a question. All right, everyone. Thanks for another edition of Fat Science.
No diets, no agendas, just science that makes you feel better.
I'm Mark Wright. Thanks for listening to Fat Science with Dr. Emily Cooper. New episodes drop every Monday. If you've enjoyed the conversation, subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. This production is for informational purposes only and is not intended to replace professional medical advice. Join us next week for another episode dedicated to the science of why we get fat. No diets, no agendas, just science that makes you feel better.